systems. The organic farmers really have limited access to herbicides. Most of the research in weed science is based on herbicide efficacy, and there's not a lot out there that has been done. There's more than you might think, but it turns out to be one of the biggest differences between organic and conventional farming. And often one of the biggest challenges that transitioning farmers face is how to manage weeds when they don't have access to the herbicides that they're used to using. There's really no silver bullet. One farmer says that they have lots of little hammers, but no big hammer, no one thing that they can rely on. So it requires a much more integrated approach, a more management-intensive approach, and frankly, a more labor-intensive approach that also is more interactive with the biological system of farming. So every farm is different. Every farm has its unique mix of crops, of weeds, of soils. And so there's no one-size-fits-all approach either. So the Weed Your Way, this is a project that had really three premises. The first is that experienced organic farmers have valuable information about weed control and that they can share that with other growers. The second is that growers can adapt and apply the strategies and techniques that are useful to them. What works for them might not work on every other farm, but at least that experience gives them the ability to adapt, to modify whatever those practices are to be suitable for their own conditions. And then the project endeavored to collect, summarize, and disseminate the information that would be readily accessible to other growers. So it was a way to seek to facilitate farmer-to-farmer exchanges and get interviewed. So the first step was to interview the experienced organic farmers, go out, visit their farms, talk with them about what they do to manage weeds. And then we also, a year ago at the same conference, got a room full of farmers together and just talked about weeds all day long. And wrote down what they said, recorded as much information as we could, and then used that to refine how we conducted the interviews. And then at the end of August this past year, we held a field day at one of the cooperating farms. So we had a survey instrument with about 30 questions. Took anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour to complete. We went with farmers that were referred to us as people who were really on top of it, people doing a good job with their weeds. And a lot of times these were sometimes fairly modest individuals, but it turned out that they had a lot to share, and we tried to get a mix. The one thing that they had in common is that they had field crops somewhere in the rotation, either a hay or a small grain, somewhere in their rotation, because management of those field crops is identified as much more of a challenge than for the row crops. The options there are more limited, but we had this mix of what their predominant system was. So in terms of producing pretty much exclusively field crops, we had about 5, but 8 were really identified as vegetable farmers who would have small grains somewhere in their rotation, even if it was as a cover crop. And then two had a mix of field crops and vegetables. We ended up throwing out we kept the dairy farmers who grew their cash grains, but people who were just cutting hay, we're not including them in the results. So pretty good spread of different types of farming systems. We considered it representative of New York State. What we tried to do was have the questions be fairly open-ended, but also be able to look at what was important for them, so that we could make some valid comparisons. So we were looking at when we asked what weeds were important, we'd look at why they were important. Is it yield reduction? Is it the labor? The other thing is that what's a problem weed one year might not necessarily be a problem in another year. So there's this evolution. Also, for those farmers who transitioned from conventional farming, there was an observation that the weeds that were a problem their first couple of years of transition often weren't problems down the road. These were the ones that came up the most. Lamb's quarters and pigweed. Vast majority of the farmers found those as problem weeds for a variety of reasons. Gallinsoga came up quite a bit in the vegetable operations, and foxtail was more of a problem with the field crop producers. We also had a number who considered ragweed to be another problem. So, and then of course some weeds are edible, and with people who are growing a salad mix, then maybe they aren't sure what a weed is. We looked at the different cultural practices and physical and mechanical methods, and then briefly I'll talk about chemical methods. But the cultural practices, these are long-term, they're strategic, they're based on the life cycle of the plant, and it requires more of an understanding of the natural growing systems of both the crop and the plant, and the crop-weed interactions. These strategies are often very site-specific and are hard sometimes to adapt for other locations. There's a lot of emphasis, should be no surprise to you, a lot of emphasis on equipment, on tillage, and on cultivation. So the use of the different tools to kill weeds was, an art and a science in itself. So, and then we had to deal with what one farmer described as the acceptable rate of murder, where you have you're going to lose some of your crop based on the cultivation and how that gets used as a factor. So did I skip one? Yeah, so we asked about specific strategies with specific weeds. And the way that people would, the way that the farmers would would target specific weeds, and these often were not the ones identified as broad problems, but these were ones that required specific practices. You have some of these perennial weeds and some of the deep-rooted weeds that are very difficult to cultivate out, requiring considerably more hand labor, and also fields that would, in some cases, when dealing with hay or alfalfa. You would have systems where you would see these perennials start to take over, and that would require some modification or rotation in order to plant something that would disrupt a specific targeted weed. It was interesting to see how you have, for example, different smother crops. This tiller radish is one that stuck out in vegetable operation, that they'll plant a tiller radish over winter to, and then follow that up with an early spring planting for vegetables. Most of the field crop producers were loath to do any hand labor, but especially if they were growing seed for market, where they were growing certified seed, then hand rogating would actually pay in a large field situation. And let's go on. So, not saying all these work. I mean, we did have a farmer who was having success. He was playing with homeopathic remedies. So it's out there. People are doing it. Should it be validated? Is it going to work on every farm? I don't know. But it is something that organic farmers are using. The whole question of setting of equipment and how and the selection of tools also is a factor that a lot of times farmers are going to have to modify their equipment to deal with specific weeds that are not cultivated with their standard setup. So,
right.
Yes?
Applied peppers, what does that mean?
The pepper is it's a biodynamic practice where they'll take the weed and they'll burn it, and then they'll take the weed seed of amaranth or lamb's quarters, and they'll burn it, and then they'll apply the ash over the field in a homeopathic dose. So, again, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I'm not here to judge. It is a practice that's being applied on some biodynamic farms. So we look at different rotations, cover crops, intercropping. One that came up quite a bit was fertility management, and maybe we can talk more about that in the question and answer. Variety selection was something we were interested in, and then looking at different planting strategies, as well as the introduction of animals into the system. We found that most of the farmers use cover crops, but the rest of these were used by some, but not most of the farmers interviewed. So these were the most used cover crops. Mustard is one. It's not so popular with the dairy farmers, or people who are growing for dairy, but it is one that's used for field crop producers and for the vegetable crop producers. Buckwheat is a one where people can have a summer window that they can fallow, put in a cover crop, and buckwheat has been identified as a very effective way of controlling perennial weeds. and in particular Canada thistle and quackgrass, that people find it who have those problems, see those problems go away after a good thick stand of buckwheat. Okay, and then you've got two small grains that are used. One winter kills, and that's oats. The other overwinters, and that's rye. And those are used in specific situations. And then the other summer cover that can be used and is used as sorghum sudan grass. And then there's red clover, which is a legume that it's the only legume that was up there that really establishes in a way that can be that is specifically used for weed management. So you've got the sorghum sudan grass plant can grow really tall, shade out the weeds, and really crowd them out. It establishes fast in the summer, but very slowly in cold weather. The red clover can put in a very thick mat and gets worked in pretty easily. And then the buckwheat, again, seems to be the most popular choice when they want to have a smothered crop somewhere in the rotation. So moving on quickly through tillage, cultivation. Most of the farmers till, most of them cultivate, and most of them till heavily. What we found is that most of the farmers out there have a good old moldboard plow, and that that's there is a debate among farmers and among weed scientists. Do you pull up more weed seeds by moldboard plowing than you kill? What are the effects? But in a lot of situations, the farmers interviewed see this as the most reliable tool that they can count on. It's low cost. It's easy to set up. There's not a lot that goes into it, and it's still it's still more used than the chisel or the disc. For cultivation, what we found is that most of the farmers we interviewed have toolbars, usually several. They will often have, for different purposes, a front mount, belly mount, and rear mount that they will use for different situations, and they'll have different toolbars set up, and they'll set the toolbars up before the season starts to have it instead of and not have to worry about adjusting it during the season. It's a way to save labor and time. Tying weeders are seen as very valuable tools, especially for the corn and soybean producers. This was something that came out at the field day that we held at Thorpe's and East Aurora. How am I doing on time? Okay. We're really interested in strategies of dense planting and thinning, but what we found when we actually drilled down that the seeding rates for organic farmers really weren't that much different from those of conventional farmers. That they were, because of the equipment, because of the recommendations and a number of other factors, that we're, for corn and beans, we're pretty much looking at the standard planting rates and spacings. With small grains, we're seeing a little bit of a thicker stand, especially with people who are doing post-immersion cultivation, but they're really not super high. We saw that a little bit with vegetables as well, but for vegetables, most of the time the spacing was set up based on equipment and standard setup and didn't really vary, wasn't really that much heavier than what we would see in a non-organic farm. Briefly about chemical control, there were only two farmers interviewed who were using any of the herbicides that are allowed for organic production. They didn't like them very much. So they cost quite a bit. They weren't very effective. And these were both people who had transitioned from conventional, so they were used to herbicides working like they do for conventional farming. Those who didn't use them really either hadn't heard anything good about them or didn't really see the need. So, but it did come up. So the last thing we asked was, well, what kind of research do we want to see done on organic weed management? And one that came up quite a bit was nutrition, the role of nutrition in soil fertility management in weeds, and how does that address weed problems. The life cycle of weeds is another one. And how do you manipulate seed dormancy, either to keep weed seeds dormant until they're no longer viable, or to use a stale seed bed, germinate them up, and then kill them after they're germinated? How do you work with those two different mechanisms, and what's the best way to go about that? So that's a promising avenue for research. Lots of interest in the development of different tools and mechanical equipment. This is something that Europe seems to be far ahead. The whole question of tillage and no-till. A lot of people use moldboard plows, but a lot of people don't like them. They'd rather see another alternative, but they haven't found an alternative yet that works as well. And then species-specific strategies, interest in development of herbicides for organic, and flaming, as long as it can be energy intensive. So yes, organic farmers have expertise to share. The most organic experienced farmers still need to have a better understanding of the ecology on their farms. They want to have a better understanding. Most see need for relying on more on cultural practices and that some of these topics in ecological weed management deserve more attention. There's also an observation by those of us who did the study that there's information out there and farmers haven't got it yet. So there needs to be a better job of disseminating what we already know. So I wanted to thank the farmers that agreed to be interviewed. I see a couple of them in the audience, and also wanted to thank the Organic Farming Research Foundation. So thank you.